In the heart of Eldridge Falls, a town where the mundane met the mysterious four friends, Alex, Casey, Jordan, and Riley, gathered around a dusty table cluttered with microphones, a laptop, and an old tape recorder. It was the makeshift studio for their new venture, a horror podcast named Whispers Beyond the Grave. The air was thick with anticipation and the faint smell of cold coffee. "All right, folks," Alex began, the unofficial leader of the group, his voice a mix of excitement and nerves. "This isn't just another ghost story podcast. We're here to dig deep to find the tales that make your skin crawl, the ones that linger in your mind long after you've tried to forget them." Casey, the skeptic, rolled her eyes but smiled. "Just don't expect me to jump at every shadow," she said, adjusting her headphone. "I'm here for the facts, the history behind the horror." Jordan, the tech wizard of the group, was fiddling with the settings on the laptop. "Everything's set. We're ready to roll whenever you are," he announced, giving a thumbs up. And then there was Riley, the storyteller, whose love for horror had been the catalyst for this whole project. "For our first episode," Riley said, pulling a cassette tape from her backpack. "I've got something special. Found it in my grandpa's attic. He said it was cursed, that bad things happen to anyone who listens to it." The group exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of the moment settling over them. This was their hook, their edge, a real cursed tape right here in their first episode. "Let's do it, then," Casey said, more a challenge than a suggestion. Riley placed the tape in the recorder, her hands steady despite the palpable tension. The click of the play button echoed unnaturally in the small room. Static filled the air, a prelude to the eerie voice that emerged from the speakers. It was distorted, almost inhuman, recounting tales of darkness and despair from Eldridge Falls past, the stories twisted into one another. A tapestry of terror that seemed to pull at the very fabric of reality. As the recording played, the atmosphere shifted. Shadows seemed to dance in the corners of the room, and the temperature dropped. Whether it was their imagination or something more sinister, none of them could say. When the tape finally ended, silence enveloped the group. It was Jordan who broke it, his voice barely above a whisper. "Did anyone else feel that? Like we weren't alone?" Casey was about to dismiss it when Alex's laptop flickered, a line of text appearing on the screen without explanation. "You've been warned." They stared at the screen, the warning etched into their minds. Had they just unleashed something terrible? Or was it simply a trick, a pre-recorded message meant to scare them? Riley ejected the tape, a sense of foreboding settling over her. "Looks like we've got our first real mystery," she said, trying to mask her concern. The episode ended with more questions than answers, a perfect cliffhanger that left their listeners craving more. But as the group packed up their equipment, a feeling of unease lingered. They had sought to entertain and to thrill, but in doing so, had they invited something dark into their lives? Unknown to them, their listeners were about to experience the same unsettling phenomena. Eldridge Falls was no stranger to the supernatural, but Whispers Beyond the Grave had just opened a door that perhaps should have remained closed. After the launch of Whispers Beyond the Grave, the buzz was undeniable. Social media lit up with mentions, shares, and more intriguingly, listener experiences. Alex scrolled through the comments, a mix of skepticism and curiosity in his eyes. "Guys, check this out," he called over to his friends, who were sprawled across various pieces of second-hand furniture in their makeshift studio. Casey, still the ever-skeptic, peered over with a raised eyebrow. "Let me guess, ghost sightings and unexplained chills," she joked, but her humor was tinged with a hint of genuine interest. Jordan, who'd been obsessively checking the podcast download stats, chimed in without looking up. "We're blowing up, but some of these comments are weird." Riley, leaning against an old bookshelf filled with horror classics, was the first to notice the shift in the room. "Like what?" she asked, her storyteller's heart beating faster with anticipation. Alex read aloud from his phone. "Here's one from a haunting herald. Listen to your first episode and my light started flickering. Coincidence? I think not. And there's more like this." The group exchanged uneasy looks at their earlier bravado dimming in the face of these accounts. It's probably just people getting into the spirit of things. Casey rationalized, though her voice lacked its usual conviction, but the messages kept coming. A listener reported her dog barking at the phone from which the episode played. Another spoke of a cold draft filling the room, despite closed windows and a working heater. The tales varied, but each shared a thread of unease, of something touched by their listening experience. "It's just the power of suggestion," Jordan finally said, breaking the heavy silence. "Our minds playing tricks on us." Riley wasn't so sure. The cursed tape, the warnings, now this coincidence seemed too convenient an explanation. Determined to understand, the group decided to delve deeper into the tape's origins for their next episode. This investigative turn would take them to the local library to pore over old newspapers and town records, anything that might shed light on the tape and its alleged curse. As they dug through dusty archives, the line between past and present blurred. Eldridge Falls had always been a town where the strange and the ordinary lived side by side, but now the friends were at the heart of its mysteries. The deeper they delved, the more the town's history revealed itself to be a tapestry of unexplained events, of whispers of darkness that lingered just out of sight. It was a history that had always been there, waiting for someone to listen. And listen they did. But as they prepared to share their findings, an anonymous email arrived. "Stop digging," it read. "Some doors are better left closed." The warning sent a chill through them, a sign that their podcast had touched something real, something that wanted to remain hidden. But curiosity, as it often does, overrode caution. They were in too deep to back out now. "Let's record," Alex said, a determined glint in his eye. "We owe it to our listeners. Besides, what's the worst that could happen?" Famous last words, as they say. As they set up for the next recording, each felt the weight of what they were about to do. They were no longer just friends making a podcast. They were custodians of secrets that perhaps were never meant to be shared. But share they would. The truth, whatever it may be, awaited them and their listeners on the next episode of Whispers Beyond the Grave. The town's library, an ancient building that seemed to groan under the weight of its own history, became the center of Alex, Casey, Jordan, and Riley's world. Surrounded by towering shelves of books, they pored over old newspapers, dusty tomes, and forgotten manuscripts, seeking clues about the cursed tape's origins. Casey, ever the skeptic, had to admit there was something unnerving about the way the librarian watched them, her eyes shadowed beneath the brim of a wide hat. "Be careful what you look for," she'd whispered, her voice a rustle of leaves. "Not all secrets want to be found." Undeterred, they delved deeper, uncovering tales of a local legend, a medium from the 1980s known for her seances that bridged the living and the dead. It was said she disappeared under mysterious circumstances, leaving behind only the tape they now possessed. "This has to be it," Riley breathed, excitement lacing her voice. "She must have recorded one of her seances, and somehow it ended up in your grandpa's attic." The group decided to visit the medium's last known address, a dilapidated house on the outskirts of Eldridge Falls. The air grew heavier as they approached, the atmosphere thick with an anticipation they all felt but didn't voice. The house, choked by ivy and neglect, seemed to watch them as they entered. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with silence. They set up their equipment in what appeared to have been the medium's seance room, a circle of chairs surrounding a dusty table. As the recording light blinked on, an inexplicable cold swept through the room, breaths visible in the air. They began their podcast, recounting their findings, the story of the medium, and their theories about the tape. Midway through, the equipment malfunctioned, static filling the airwaves. A voice, barely discernible, emerged from the noise, speaking words they couldn't quite catch. The temperature dropped further, their breaths now clouds in the frigid air. Then silence. The moment passed, leaving them to question if it had happened at all. Shaken, they packed up, deciding to end the episode with what they had recorded, uncertain of what had occurred. As they left the house, a feeling of being watched lingered, the medium's presence a whisper on the wind. Back in their studio, they played back the recording. Clear as day, amidst the static, a message emerged. "Beware the keeper of secrets, for they are not yours to tell." The episode aired to a flurry of reactions. Listeners were captivated, drawn into the mystery, their hunger for answers as insatiable as the podcast's creators. Eldridge Falls was abuzz with theories. The legend of the medium reborn, But with the message came a warning, one that Alex, Casey, Jordan, and Riley could not ignore. They had stirred something that had been meant to remain hidden, and now they had to face the consequences of their curiosity. The mystery of the cursed tape had deepened, the past reaching out to the present, and Whispers Beyond the Grave had become more than a podcast. It had become a beacon for the unexplained, drawing both the living and the dead closer. The air was thick with anticipation as Alex, Casey, Jordan, and Riley gathered around their cluttered table, their recent discoveries weighing heavily on their minds. The podcast had stirred something ancient, something that had been lying dormant in Eldritch Falls, waiting for a whisper to wake it. As they prepared to dive into their next episode, the atmosphere was charged with a palpable tension. They were no longer merely storytellers. They had become part of the story, entangled in a web that spanned beyond the veil of reality. Our journey into the medium's past opened more than just old wounds. Alex started, his voice steady, yet tinged with unease. It seems we've caught the attention of something. Or someone. Casey, usually the voice of reason, added, "We've received countless messages since our last episode. People experiencing things they can't explain, and it's not just our listeners, it's us too." Indeed, inexplicable occurrences had become a disturbingly regular part of their lives. Shadows flickered at the edges of their vision. Objects moved of their own accord, and the feeling of being watched had grown impossible to ignore. Jordan, who'd always relied on logic, struggled to rationalize the events. I tried debunking these incidents, but the more I try, the less sense it makes. Riley, her curiosity aflame that refused to be quenched, had pored over ancient texts and obscure forums, seeking answers. "There's talk of an entity bound to the tape. It feeds on fear, on the darkness within us. Listening to the tape, talking about it, it's like we've invited it into our lives." The decision to face this entity head-on was unanimous. They needed answers, not just for their peace of mind, but for their safety and that of their listeners. The next episode would be a live seance, an attempt to communicate with the entity and perhaps find a way to sever its connection to their world. As the night of the seance arrived, the air in their studio was electric, a storm brewing within the confines of the crammed space. The lights dimmed, candles flickered, and the recording began. What followed was a harrowing experience that would forever change them. The entity made its presence known, not through words, but through feelings, despair, anger, and a deep, consuming sadness. It was ancient, bound to the tape by a ritual gone awry, seeking release, seeking vengeance. The session ended abruptly, the entity's anger manifesting physically. Equipment shattered, the lights burst, and a cold wind swept through the room, leaving them in darkness. In the aftermath, shaken but unharmed, they knew they had to end this. The final moments of their episode, a heartfelt plea to their listeners to never seek out the tape. To let this story end with them, resonated with a sincerity born of terror. The episode aired, a testament to their ordeal, a warning to those who would follow in their footsteps. The entity's presence receded in the days that followed, its hold on them weakened by their refusal to fear it any longer. Their podcast had started as a simple project among friends, a dive into the unknown for the thrill of it. It had become a battle for their souls, a confrontation with a darkness that sought to consume them. In the end, Whispers Beyond the Grave was more than a podcast. It was a record of their journey into the heart of fear, a journey that tested the limits of their courage and their bond. They had stared into the abyss, and though it had stared back, they emerged stronger, their friendship a beacon in the darkness. And while the entity might linger, a shadow at the edge of thought, Alex, Casey, Jordan, and Riley had learned a valuable lesson. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. But together, they could face whatever lay beyond. The aftermath of the seance left a tangible silence in its wake, a silence that spoke volumes to Alex, Casey, Jordan, and Riley, as they sat amidst the chaos of their once cozy studio. The air felt different, lighter, as if a weight had been lifted, yet the shadow of their recent encounter lingered. Alex broke the silence, his voice a mix of weariness and resolve. We did it. It's over, but at what cost? Casey, looking around at the shattered remnants of their equipment, managed a weak smile. At least we're all here, safe. That's what matters. Jordan, ever the pragmatist, was already thinking ahead. We gotta tell our listeners what happened. They've been on this journey with us from the start. Riley nodded in agreement. But let's make sure this story ends with us. No one else needs to go through this. Their final episode was a raw and honest recounting of their experiences, a farewell to a project that had brought them to the edge of the unknown and back. They shared their fears, their victories and their losses, their voices a testament to the bond that had carried them through the darkest of times. As they concluded the recording, Alex's words resonated with a solemn gravity. To those who've been with us since the beginning, thank you. Remember, some mysteries are best left unexplored. The episode aired to a flood of responses, messages of support, gratitude, and, surprisingly, relief. It seemed the entity's influence had reached further than they'd thought, and their decision to end the podcast was met with an understanding that perhaps some doors are meant to remain closed. In the weeks that followed, life slowly returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after such an ordeal. The friends found themselves drawn to each other more than ever, their shared experience a bond stronger than any could have imagined. One evening, as they gathered in their favourite diner, a sense of closure settling over them, Riley posed a question that had been lingering in the back of their minds. Do you think we'll ever do something like this again? Alex chuckled, shaking his head. I think we've had enough of the supernatural to last a lifetime. Casey raised her coffee cup in a mock toast to staying firmly in the realm of the living. Jordan, looking around at his friends, felt a surge of affection. Whatever we do next, we do it together. No more curse tapes. They laughed, the sound mingling with the clatter of dishes and the low hum of conversation around them. It was a simple moment, but for them, it was everything. A return to the life they'd almost lost, a reminder of the strength they found in each other. As they left the diner, the night air crisp against their skin, they knew that their story was one they would carry with them forever, a reminder of the darkness they had faced and the light they had found in each other. Whispers Beyond the Grave was over, but their story was just beginning, and somewhere in the depths of Eldridge Falls, the tape remained, its secrets locked away, a silent witness to the power of friendship, courage, and the human spirit to overcome the shadows.